For the last couple of years here on this program, we have highlighted something which to me is a growing scandal in America, the criminalization of the American people. Our prisons are packed. The cost of incarceration is skyrocketing. The damage to young lives is beyond imagination. And what is causing it? Well, this excessive belief that we're going to be tough on crime. So you have a generation of politicians who went before the voters and said, this crime is terrible. We're going to go after these criminals. And one of the things we're going to do is do a war on drugs. We're going to spend billions of dollars getting rid of this curse of drugs. And anybody that deals with drugs is going to get locked up regardless. And we had a governor who was a dear friend of mine here in Virginia who had a big thing about, I'm going to abolish parole. So in the prison, if you got a sentence, you were stuck for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. Well, then we went to, they couldn't get them on the first time, then they couldn't get them on the second time, so they did what was called 3 strikes and you're out. If you had 3 criminal offenses, 3 judgments against you, you were going to go to not just 5 years, 10 years, but life. Now imagine getting sentenced to life in prison for doing what? Taking a slice of pizza or a cookie. It looks like something out of Les Miserables. Well, believe it or not, it could actually happen under the 3 strikes laws. Those laws were supposed to get violent criminals off the streets. Instead, they have succeeded in locking up thousands, tens of thousands of nonviolent offenders at an enormous cost to society and, of course, the taxpayer. And, of course, it hasn't affected the crime rate at all. Our Jennifer Wishon has this shocking story from Washington.
The U.S. puts more people behind bars than any other country. More than 10% of those in American prisons face life sentences. Some call life the new death sentence, where in some cases, golf club thieves get the same punishment as armed bank robbers. Much of this is due to laws made popular in the 90s.
And those who commit repeated violent crimes should be told, when you commit a 3rd violent crime, you will be put away and put away for good. 3 strikes and you are out.
The murders of 2 young girls by criminals with long rap sheets led to this 3 strikes movement. Dozens of states and the federal government rushed laws on the books that trigger an automatic life sentence on a 3rd felony conviction. The laws were designed to keep violent repeat offenders off the streets, but in many cases, a person can get locked up for life for committing a nonviolent, even laughable crime. For instance, in California, there are people in prison on their 3rd strike for stealing a pair of socks, taking change from a parked car, shoplifting a pair of work gloves, and even stealing a chocolate chip cookie from a restaurant.
3 strikes laws don't work.
Mark Marr has studied sentencing policies and the criminal justice system for 30 years. He says 3 strikes laws have succeeded in locking up thousands without any substantial drop in the crime rate.
Yeah, the problem with these laws is that it's a one-size-fits-all policy. And the reason we have judges is to determine individual circumstances. No 2 crimes, no 2 offenders are exactly alike.
And judges find their hands tied under 3 strikes laws. They have no freedom to consider the circumstances of the crime or the defendant. In the case of Rayvell Finch, a 22-year-old sentenced to life for heroin possession under Louisiana's 3 strikes law, the judge called the sentence clearly excessive and designed to cause needless suffering. According to the Sentencing Project, more than 10,000 people serving life have been convicted of a nonviolent crime. However, even when parole is an option, criminologist Fran Buntman says there's a hesitation.
I think it's the fear that there will be the unlucky politician who supports a policy and the person who gets out of prison or doesn't go into prison because of that policy lands up murdering somebody.
So many politicians want to be tough on crime.
Yes, though I think we are starting to see a shift on that. What we need in our sentencing policy is far more sophisticated, fine-tuned approaches that emphasize empirical evidence, that emphasize our better values in terms of we'd rather invest in schools than prisons.
Public support is building for reforming the way criminals are sentenced. It's also uniting some unlikely allies in Washington. Liberal Senators Patrick Leahy and Dick Durbin are teaming up with conservative Senators Rand Paul and Mike Lee to sponsor a bill that would do away with mandatory federal sentences for nonviolent offenders.
What is it costing taxpayers to put all of these people away for life?
Conservatively speaking, it costs about $25,000 a year to keep someone in prison. When people become older, 50 or so, it can be 3 times that much.
That's $60,000 to $70,000 a year for elderly prisoners who likely pose no threat to society.
If there's one thing we know in criminology, it's that people do tend to age out of crime.
Crime rates go down drastically as people mature into their 30s and 40s, which is why Maher argues holding people for life, in many cases, is a bad public investment.
1 in 9 people in prison are serving a life sentence. That is staggering. Is this a moral issue?
I think so.
And Dr. Buntman credits Christians for bringing questions of morality to the debate over sentencing.
Committing crime is not moral, but neither is over-punishing moral. And we have to find the right balance between the morality of punishment and the immorality of over-punishment.
Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
Ladies and gentlemen, right now, for example, in Colorado, they have legalized marijuana. They're doing it in other states. I think New York is easing up. And it seems like to me the most important thing we could do is for the president to sign an executive order essentially commuting the sentences of those who've been convicted under these 3-strike laws, and also for these minor drug-related offenses, and turn them loose. I mean, they just let them go. I mean, think what that would do to our prisons. It would be fantastic. And give these people a chance to rehab. But what we've got now is ridiculous. You know, this whole idea of a penitentiary was put in by, I don't know, the Quakers or whoever. Somebody would sit in a prison and be penitent. They would, be penitent on account of their deeds. I sat on a commission, a presidential commission of victims of crime, and we heard testimony in Washington, D.C. that there were about 500 violent repeat offenders in the whole city. And if those people were put out of commission, the crime rate would fall dramatically. But instead of that, we've put out a net that brings in, nonviolent offenders, brings in 16, 17-year-olds. You have possession of an ounce of marijuana or something, you get 5 years in prison. I mean, this is ridiculous. And it's time that we recognize it. So in any event, what happens if somebody is convicted of having possession of marijuana? He lives in Colorado. It's no longer illegal to possess marijuana in Colorado. Do you let that guy out of prison? Well, you certainly should. And think what it would do. I mean, it would help the budget tremendously, but it would also give life back to people who have been put in jail. It seems like to me the best course is restitution. You confront the person that you have hurt, and you do something to make them whole. You do something to help them. You confront the person that you've injured. In terms of marijuana, what have you done? You've hurt yourself. So you do community service to try to rehab. That's fine. So many hours of cleaning up the neighborhoods. That'd be great. Go on a work detail. But no longer incarceration. Let's stop this warehousing of human beings. Who ever heard of the land of the free and the home of the brave being the country that has more people incarcerated than any other in the world, including communist China and former communist Russia? It makes no sense. Well, that's my 2 cents.
Well
10
spoken.
cents, 5 cents.
Yeah, it's about a quarter, but it was well spoken.
25 cents.